Cô Thơ ơi, mình bắt đầu nhé.
Dạ vâng chị ơi.
Xin kính chào các thầy cô, xin kính chào các quý vị đại biểu và xin kính chào các bạn học viên, sinh viên hiện tại đang online. Chào mừng các thầy cô và quý vị đại biểu cũng như là các em học viên, sinh viên đến với seminar do Research Lab của Trường Đại học Ngoại, Thương tổ chức với chủ đề là phân tích văn bản trong nghiên cứu kinh tế. Và ngày hôm nay thì chúng tôi mời đến đây một diễn giả rất là phải nói là dùng là từ gọi là xịn sò lúc nào là như vậy, rất là xịn sò, là một cô giáo xinh đẹp trẻ và lại là một nhà nghiên cứu xuất sắc. Nói đến những xuất bản của cô thì phải nói rằng là khi mà tôi giảng dạy về phương pháp nghiên cứu khoa học thì trong tất cả các buổi học của tôi, trong tất cả các lớp về phương pháp nghiên cứu khoa học, tôi đều nói về một bài nghiên cứu mà cô Thơ chính là tác giả của bài đó. Đấy chính là The Voice of Monetary Policy, một bài được đăng trên tạp chí American Economic Review. Chỉ nghe cái tên của American Economic Review thôi là người ta đã đủ thấy cái uy tín của các nhà nghiên cứu đó rồi. Tôi đã từng nghe thấy người ta nói rằng là đối với các giáo sư ở trên thế giới, chỉ cần một bài đăng trên tạp chí American Economic Review thôi là đã có thể là nghỉ hưu rồi, nghỉ hưu rồi. Nhưng mà cô Thơ lại có một bài trên American Economic Review khi tuổi chưa đến 30, Thế nên là đây là ngày hôm nay chúng tôi cảm thấy rất là vinh dự được mời đến seminar của Research Lab một nhà nghiên cứu trẻ tài năng, và hôm nay đã trình bày một chủ đề rất là hot trong lĩnh vực nghiên cứu, đó chính là phân tích văn bản, text analysis. Xin giới thiệu một đôi nét về cô Thơ. Cô Thơ hiện đang là giảng viên cao cấp của trường Đại học York University ở Vương quốc Anh, và cô đã có những xuất bản trên những tạp chí hàng đầu. Ngoài American Economic Review thì có những xuất bản trên tạp chí Journal of Econometrics hay là Journal of Corporate Finance, những tạp chí 4-star mà thực sự là rất là đáng ngưỡng mộ. Và vì thế mà xin cảm ơn cô Thơ. Cô Thơ có thể bật cam lên một chút xíu đúng không ạ? Bây giờ hôm nay là cô Thơ phải dậy rất là sớm ạ. Bây giờ ở bên UK mới chỉ là 9 giờ sáng, còn bên đấy thì 9 giờ sáng là rất là sớm. Cảm ơn cô Thơ rất là nhiều đã dành thời gian đến online để mà trình bày một chủ đề mà ở trường học ngoại thương cũng như là các nhà nghiên cứu ở Việt Nam đang rất là quan tâm. Xin cảm ơn cô Thơ rất là nhiều ạ. Và bây giờ xin nhường mic cho cô Thơ ạ.
Vâng, cảm ơn cô Trang và cảm ơn các thầy cô và các bạn sinh viên đã đến với lại là buổi seminar ngày hôm nay. Well, when Trang asked me to, give a seminar, I thought about what kind of things that I could present, and I decided to go with the topic as you can see in the title today. I will talk about natural language processing for applied economics, both in terms of what is available to use, what you should not use, what you should not do for your research, and I will also talk about my own research that I have been using NLP for. Oops, 1 second. You can hear me well, right?
Có cô ạ.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right, so the reason why I wanted to talk about NLP in economic research in general, instead of just talking about my own research, is because as a journal editor, I can see that many of us nowadays use like NLP packages for their research, but most people or many people don't really understand or don't really know what the package is actually doing behind the scene. And in my opinion, as researchers, it is not good when we use something and we don't really understand what it is. And so that's why I want to give this talk today. And at the beginning, I will give you some overview of what I mean when I say that many of us use NLP packages but do not know what the package is actually doing. And then I will move on and talk about how NLP has evolved over the last, I would say, 40, 50 years, starting from a very simple method, and now today we have all these big language models and so on. And then I will talk about my FTU research that I have been doing, and I have used NLP in both of these papers. And finally, I will also give you some, I would say, recommendations of what you should do and what you should not do when you decide to use NLP for your own research. And feel free to stop me at any time if anything is not clear or if you have any questions. Right, so what I mean when I say a lot of us have been using NLP for their research, but don't really understand what it is. It is because a typical kind of workflow in an analytical paper, especially in finance and economics, that I have seen so far is people download an off-the-shelf model, like think about Feedback, and they use that model, off-the-shelf model, on their own data to get some prediction, whether it is like sentiment or ESG scores and so on, and then they use the prediction in the later regression as either the left-hand side variable or the right-hand side variable, and then move on. That's it. Now, nothing is wrong with that. We are economists, so we use what is available for us to use. But the problem that I see is when you use an off-the-shelf model without actually digging into what it is, then you just let the model decide what is best for your data, and that will then drive the results. So you don't really understand what was done for like pre-processing, what was done to validate the results, what was done to aggregate the prediction, and so on. Everything was done suddenly by package. And if you just simply download the package, apply it on your data without actually going back and read the original paper that authors discussed, how they developed the model or how they developed the package, then you simply blindly using somebody else's product without actually understand what the product is about. And because of that, your prediction, the output that you're going to get from like NLP package is a measurement. Like I said, it could be sentiment, it could be ESG score, it could be anything. And measurements always have error. If you blindly use that measurement in the later analysis, you're likely to suffer from biases, from measurement errors. And you will not be able to defend your later analysis if you don't even understand what could be the source of measurement errors that you might have with your NLP kind of derived variables. And with the development of, large language models and machine learning and so on, there are many, many packages that can be used to get to the same aim. Like, think about financial sentiment. There are many, many models or many, many packages that you can find on Hugging Face that claim to give you the best prediction of financial text sentiment. And all of them, when you use them, you could get different numbers for the same text that you have. So then the question is, why do you use one model over another? Why use this particular model for your data and not another model that is as equally famous as the one that they are using? And as the reviewers and also journal editors, we keep asking these type of questions: why authors use this particular model, why they use the particular prompt, and why this particular threshold. For example, like when you get prediction with the predict probability of a sentiment, why do you use 0.7, for example, as the threshold in your analysis? Why don't you use 0.9 or 0.8? Everything has to be defended in the paper, and if you don't understand what package is about, you will not be able to defend your choice for the later analysis in the paper. So in the talk today, what I will talk about, I will explain in simple terms what each of the NLP methods actually doing. And I will show you some applications in my own work where I have used NLP to derive some variables, and I use it in my analysis. Some of it might not be, the main innovation in my paper, but it is still important, and I will explain why it's still important, even though it's not the main contribution of my paper when I talk about them later. And I will also talk from the experience as a journal editor about what you should and should not do when you decide to use text analysis and NLP for your own work. I'm an economist, so I will not pretend that I'm a computer scientist and try to explain all of the statistics and the math behind the model. It's not the aim of my talk today. I will also not recommend any single best model, because there isn't one. There are many models out there for you to use. It is up to you to decide what is best for your data, for your task, depending on your understanding of the model and your understanding of your own data. And I will not also treat LLMs as something fantastic and error-free, because all models, they are tools, so they always have some failure modes that, again, we have to understand what the model is about to understand what type of errors that the model might make, and then be able to defend why it might matter for your later analysis in your paper. Right, so what is NLP? I have been using this term from the beginning of my talk today. Under the hood, what NLP means is simply we use machine to transform the raw text, which is very messy, contain noise, and unstructured. So the lab box in my picture here, we will use machine to somehow transform them and extract some useful information from them. So we move from this box to the last box, which we consider a downstream task. And the downstream task could be sentiment that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It could be also about topic discovery. We want to understand what was the key topics that was mentioned in those documents that you have in hand. You might also want to do more than that. You might want to look at what is the similarity of the text or among the text that you have in the data and so on. So there are many downstream tasks that you can think of when we talk about natural language processing. Now, like I said, NLP is where we use machine to do this, transformation and analysis for us. And machine only works with numbers. It doesn't work with raw text. So essentially, everything goes down to the intermediate step, which is really important, is that we have to find a way to represent our unstructured, messy text with some numbers. So think about the word, the text, I am happy, right? To make the machine understand it and do some analysis with it, we have to convert this I am happy sentence into some numbers. It could be 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, depending on what was the underlying, let's say, models that you used to convert the raw text into the numbers, and that is important. Now, nowadays, with the development of LLMs and think about AI models like ChatGPT or Cloud, the second and the third step, so the numerical representation and the downstream task have been kind of combined and blurred, in the sense that in the past, we do everything sequentially. So we come from the raw text, we convert it into numbers, and then we put these numbers, train some sort of machine learning models on these numbers for our downstream task. Now, LLMs, and especially the more modern LLM models, what they do is they actually combine the second and the third step together. So in the process of training the model, they ultimately optimize both the numerical representation of the text and the downstream task as well. So in short, what I want to tell you about is NLP, natural language processing, is much more than just sentiment analysis. So I don't want to give you the wrong idea that when we talk about NLP, it is all about sentiment prediction. positive, negative, neutral, or ESG scores is not just about sentiment. It's not just about prediction. It could be about topic discovery. It could be about information retrieval. It could be about similarity, comparisons, and so on. Right. So now in the next, I would say 15-20 minutes or so, I will talk you through 5 different methods in the order of historical and conceptual depth that we have been using in both computer science world and in economics world to analyze the text. Now, the first method, which comes in they are actually 2 different methods, but they have a very kind of similar idea, so we tend to put them together, is the back-and-forth and TF-IDF, so term frequency inverse document frequency. With this kind of very basic historical method, the underlying assumption is the word order doesn't matter. So the way we're gonna represent words with number is based on the frequency of words in the document. That's the whole idea of back-and-forth and TF-IDF. And then computer scientists, they get smarter, so they move away from this simple frequency-based kind of method, and they started using machine learning model to do what we call the static embedding. So think about the model like what you like. And the underlying assumption of this static embedding model is what's in the similar context would mean similar things, which obviously, now we think about it, it makes a lot of sense. But many years ago, it was like a huge development in the NLP world when people move away from the frequency-based method to the static embedding kind of methods. And then more recently, we have this transformers model. So think about BERT or Roberta or all of these models that you can find on Hugging Face website. These newer embedding models have a different underlying assumption. These assumptions behind the transformer models is that the meaning is a function of full sentence context. So for the same word, when they appear in different sentences, they get different context, and depending on the context, the same word will have different meanings, and of course, we then have different embeddings. And more recently, over the last few years, we see the huge development in the AI world, where we have all these new LLM models like an AI like ChatGPT or Cloud, which are the pre-trained models that's supposed to already know your task, and you don't even need to train the model yourself. You just need to ask the model specific questions or specific prompt and ask it to do the analysis for you and feed it with the data that you have. And the final method, which I have been leaning toward more for my work, is what we could consider domain fine-tuning, where I use off-the-shelf models. But
Cô Trúc có thể tại vì chị muốn hỏi luôn á, vì hôm nay cũng có rất nhiều các diễn giả ở đây cũng là các cái người tham dự là cũng rất là nhiều các bạn học viên và sinh viên và là người Việt Nam. Nên là xin phép là chị sẽ hỏi câu hỏi bằng tiếng Việt nhé, là có thể là nói một lấy ví dụ là trong những cái web.
You're muted.
Cô ơi, mic cô bị tắt rồi cô ạ. Cô mở lại mic đi ạ.
Ok. Được chưa? Cô Thơ nghe được chưa nhỉ?
Dạ được rồi.
Tại vì là ngày hôm nay thì cũng có rất là nhiều, cô Thơ có thể nhìn thấy hiện tại là những người tham gia online là 50 người, và trong đó thì rất là nhiều các học viên, sinh viên và cũng như các nhà nghiên cứu ở Việt Nam, thì nên là người dân rất quan tâm đến cái chủ đề này. Và xin phép cô Thơ là chị sẽ hỏi bằng tiếng Việt nhé. Cô Thơ có thể là lấy ví dụ trong cái method như thế này thì cái chủ đề nào thì sẽ phù hợp với các method như vậy. Ví dụ như là better would chẳng hạn thì chị thấy là order, tức là would order doesn't matter. Thì ví dụ như là would doesn't matter như vậy thì cái chủ đề như thế nào thì có thể áp dụng để đó chẳng hạn. Bởi vì là tất cả những cái method này hiện tại người ta vẫn đang dùng chứ không phải là người ta loại bỏ cái method nào đi, đúng không ạ? Thế thì cô Thơ có thể là làm rõ hơn một số các cái ví dụ để tôi thực sự có thể là sẽ hiểu thêm nhé. Cảm ơn cô Thơ ạ.
Right, that's a very good question. So this is only the summary of what I'm going to talk next. So the question that Ko Chang just asked is actually something that I will discuss in the next few slides. So if you can bear with me just for like 1-2 seconds, I will talk about when to use and when not to use these models or methods later. Yeah. Right. So where was I? So as I was saying, the last method that I personally lean towards when I use NLP for my research is what we could consider domain fine-tuning, that I would use an off-the-shelf model, but I will adapt it or fine-tune it on my own labeled data, on my own training sample, so that I can make an off-the-shelf model to be better suited for the task and for the data that I have on hand. So just to follow up on the question that Ko Chang just asked about, okay, so all of these models or methods, they exist, and many of us didn't use one or a combination of them for our research. So when to use and when not to use each one of these methods. So let's start with the first one, which is the frequency-based kind of methods. And as I mentioned, it could be either backup words or term frequency in first document frequency. Or in the simpler term, you might have encountered what we consider the dictionary method, where you have a dictionary of, let's say, negative words, positive words. You count the frequency of each of the words in your data and then compute some sort of sentiment score based on the frequencies of these negative versus positive words in the document. So like I said, even this dictionary-based approach is under the umbrella of backup words and TF-IDF. And the whole idea is when we have a lot of documents, we have a lot of sentences and paragraphs, then the words that appear more in those documents might matter more for whatever document that we are talking about. So let's say if you think about the slides that I have today as one collection of many documents, many slides, and I keep talking and I keep mentioning the word like NLP, then NLP must be the key topic or the key things that my document wants to convey today. So that's the idea of using word frequency as the way to represent the importance of the words in the document. But obviously, we know that some words, they might appear in multiple documents in the whole collection, but they might not mean a lot of things. Like, for example, I keep using the word I because I'm the one who's speaking right now, but I means nothing in terms of topics, in terms of importance for my talk today. So TF-IDF is based on that idea that TF-IDF method will downweight the words that are common across all documents, and they will be able to upwards, put this way, the common words but are more important for specific documents or for specific groups of documents. As I also mentioned, what it assumes is the word order does not matter. If we have the phrase like bank raised rates, it will be the same as raised bank, which we know that this is not really true in many cases. But it is still used a lot, and I personally use it as benchmark in my analysis as well, is because it's transparent, right? You simply count the frequency of words in your document, so nothing can go wrong with that. You can always go back to your document, and do the manual count yourself to verify whether the method is working as intended. It's also very easy to interpret because, again, it is simply based on the word frequency. So you can always change the way you aggregate the frequencies, change the way you assign the weights to, the negative versus positive words in your data. And you can generate different measures. You can generate different kind of robometrics just based on this simple method. And because of that it is very transparent, it is easy to use, and it is very easy to interpret. That's why the dictionary methods is still dominant, that a lot of us still use dictionary methods. And that's why think about the dictionary like from Lucrent and McDonald's for financial text. It is still a very important benchmark in finance research, that a lot of us, when we try to extract some sort of sentiment from the financial text, we still use this LM, Lucrent and McDonald's dictionary as the benchmark. And whatever else comes with, like fancy language models will come later to compare with the benchmark. Now, the problem with this simple and easy approach or method, like backup words, is for the same word, it might mean different things in different contexts. So think about the word bank. The word bank in central bank or financial or commercial bank is different from the bank in river bank. And unfortunately, these kind of methods like backup words and TF-IDF, they don't have the ability to differentiate between commercial bank and river bank. And in many contexts, this differentiation between central bank and river bank is important. With the backup words and TF-IDF kind of methods, it also does not take into account negation. So even think about the simple text analysis, a sentiment analysis. If I say I am happy, it has a very different meaning from when I say I am not happy. And again, unfortunately, with the backup words and TF-IDF, it cannot differentiate between the first and the second sentence that I just told you about. And it doesn't take into account the context and so on, which again, context will become matter in many type of settings and data. And because of this weakness of backup words and TF-IDF type of methods, computer scientists have moved away, or well, not moving away, but they have developed the new models, new methods to deal with these type of situations, to deal with the fact that commercial bank is different from river bank, and bank in different contexts might mean different things. And that's why we have the, let's say, the second branch of models or methods that have been used in the literature, which is the static word embeddings. So you might have come across the models like virtual fact or growth. The idea of these static word embedding models is that each word really gets one dense factor that was learned from the current patterns in the corpus. So the idea is, in my corpus, if the word bank appears a lot with other words like commercial or with central, it might mean the banks in the context of like a financial institution, and the model will be able to learn that context, and it will be able to generate the factors, the numerical factor, to present the word bank correctly for that particular data that I have. Now, and as I mentioned, the context is learned during the training to shape the factor to decide whether the word bank will get the factor of 1 to 3 or 3 to 4 and so on, and then discarded. The context will not be reused in the inference stage when you applied that model for your own data and so on. So to make it slightly easier for you to understand, the famous example that computer scientists have been using to illustrate what does the model do is this kind of calculation: king minus man plus woman will equal to queen. So the idea is we often see king. We often see
Okay, sure.
Is there any question? No. So the idea here is we often see king and man that come together in, in the text, in fairy tales and so on. And we often see woman and queen that often appear together or is associated with each other in the text and fairy tales and whatnot. So when we train our model on, let's say, the corpus, the models will then be able to understand that king and man are associated, woman and queen are also associated, and of course, man and woman are associated as well because they are about genders. So if we take the vectors for king minus the vector for man, added in the vector for woman, then the model will be able to understand that now we are moving away from the king, but we are going towards the queen kind of space here, because that's what it learned in terms of context in the training. Man and woman are associated. King and queen are also associated because they are about royalties and so on. King and man often appear together. So by default, by construction, when we subtract man from king, added in woman, then we can get queen in terms of what would be the end results of this calculation. Now, the idea of this kind of static word embedding models is simple, intuitive, and I would say created a breakthrough in the NLP type of space. However, there is also limitations, and the key limitation here is the context is only learned and used when they learn about the factor and then thrown away. So at the end of the training process, when you apply these models on the data, you will have only one vector of embeddings for each of the word. So that's why it is called the static word embeddings. So let's say even in the data, you have some words that say commercial bank, central banks, and then some sentences that have river bank. Then for the word bank, it will only get one fixed vector, which was averaged over all of its occurrences in the corpus. So that's why at the inference time, when you apply the trained model on the new data, you will get exactly the same word embedding vectors for the bank in central bank and for the bank in river bank. The model at this stage still is not able to differentiate between central bank and river bank. Does it make sense what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, like I said, if anything is not clear, just let me know, and then I will try to make it easier to understand. Now, so this kind of static word embedding models, despite the limitation, it is still used a lot in the literature, in economics, in finance as well, simply because you can train the model on your own data at practically low cost. So you don't need a supercomputer to be able to train the word effect or a Kloof model on your own data. However, if you train these type of models on a small or noisy corpus, if your data is very limited, you have only like a few hundred sentences or paragraphs in the data, it's likely that the resulting vectors will be very noisy. And that's why you need to be careful. It's not to say that you cannot use these models on the small corpus. You can, but when you use it for the small corpus that you have to do a lot more to make sure that the vectors that you're going to get, the embeddings that you're going to get, are not that noisy. And some of the things that you could do is like to set the sequence carefully, or to bootstrap the samples, so to split the samples and so on. And that's one trick that you could do if you truly want to use this type model for your small corpus. And then, as I mentioned earlier, over the last few years, from 2018, 2017, 2018, we have seen a development of the new generation of embedding models, which is called transformer models. So you can think about like BERT, Rota, or Finberg type of models. Now, with the transformer models, they are way more powerful than the previous models, the static models, to learn about the context and to give the more accurate numerical representation of the word depending on the context. And the whole idea of these transformer models is when we apply these kind of models on our data, each word in our data or each phrase in our data will get a different vector depending on its surrounding sentence. So if I have the word central bank has decided to increase interest rate, and I have the second sentence, which is I walk along the riverbank. When we apply these type of transformer models on these two sentences, then the vector that we get for the word bank in the first sentence will be very different from the word bank that I will get when I apply the same model on the second sentence. And the main reason why these type of new transformer models are able to differentiate between riverbank and commercial bank or central bank is because of the self-attention layer. The idea of the self-attention layers in these transformer models is when we add in, or when computer scientists, they added in these self-attention layers in your model, in the machine, in the deep learning models, these self-attention layers will have the ability to look at every single token in the same type of sentence, in the same paragraph at the same time. So that's why the model will be able to understand that the word bank in the context of central bank is different from the word bank in the context of riverbank because of the word central that goes with the first phrase, and because of the river kind of word that comes with the second phrase. And the assumption is simply that meaning is contextual. Bank in commercial bank is not the same as bank in riverbank. And when we use the type of transformer models, the main advantage of it is because it was trained for you. Most of these models was already pre-trained on millions, if not billions of text. Then we don't have to do the training ourselves. And to be honest, we don't have the ability to do the training of these type of models ourselves because we would need to get access to billions of text, and we would need to get access to supercomputer to be able to do the training from scratch. So our job is actually really simple. We just need to identify the model that would work for the data that you have and then upload it on the data, as simple as that. However, when we do so, it is going back to the point that I made at the beginning. When we use this type of off-the-shelf model, interpretability is difficult. We cannot really understand why we get this type of prediction anymore because it was done by the models for us. So we don't involve in the training, and because we don't involve in the training, we don't really know what was the main reason behind this type of prediction. And another thing that is also important is not all transformers models are equal. That many of these transformer models, like think about BERT and Roberta, they were trained on general English text. They was not trained for Vietnamese or Chinese, or they was not trained for the text that come from central bank communication, for example, like in my research. And when there is this domain mismatch or the language mismatch, if we incorrectly use these models on our data in the wrong way, we will get very noisy, mismeasured type of predictions. And if we use these type of mismeasured predictions in our data analysis, of course, we're going to have bias coming from the measurement errors. So for most of the economic or finance research, the pre-trained domain model plus some sort of lightweight fine tuning would be the best choice for us if we have the ability to do so. And what I mean by that is, okay, let me skip through this LM and type of approach because this is very simple. It's simply that you go into ChatGPT or Cloud and write a prompt, give it the data, and then it will do the task for you. It will do the classification, it will do the prediction for you. You don't even need to do any training or anything. The only thing that I want to highlight here, though, is when you use LLM for text analysis without getting involved in like training the data and so on, then validation is even more important than other methods. Very often what we would have to do is we would have to get humans to do manual labeling of some of the data and then cross-check between the human labelings and the LM labelings. You also need to report the inter-rater agreement versus the LM versus human accuracy, just to see whether the prediction that we get from LM is correct or is trustworthy or not. So you should treat LLM not as a co-author. I'm sure you trust your co-author, but you should not treat LLM as a co-author. You should treat it as underpaid RA. And just like when I use my underpaid RA, I like them, but I don't trust everything that they produce. I always have to recheck what they produce because, well, they are underpaid labor, so they are likely to make mistakes. So the same logic is applied here if you decide to go to use LLM for text analysis and so on. And finally, the final approach, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the approach that I have been using for my own research. So I don't rely entirely on off-the-shelf model. I also don't rely entirely on LLM, but I tend to fine-tune off-the-shelf model or prediction from LLM for my own task. So the idea is we will take a pre-trained model, whether it's Finbird or BERT or GPT, and then we add in a classification head, and then we will continue training the model on the labeled examples from the domain from the data. And the key part here for you to think about if you decide to go with this approach is you have to have a very good labeled sample. So again, what I have been doing is I use multiple RAs to do the labeling for me, and then I will do the inter-rater agreement, title statistics, and so on to make sure that the labeled samples that I get from my RAs are good enough. And only then I will use these label samples in my training or fine-tuning of the pre-trained models. And in my own experience, it seems to me that if you have good label sample, fine-tuning on open source model is often the best as compared to the prediction that you might get from off-the-shelf model or the prediction that you might get from like LLM or AIs. So to sum up, I have told you about 5 different approaches and methods that have been used widely in the literature. The first one is a kind of frequency dictionary-based type of approach, and then the second one is the static word embedding models. Then we have transformer models, we have LLM or AI in general, and finally we have the fine-tuning approach. And what I put out here is, in my opinion, some recommendations of when you should use each one of these models and when you should not use each one of these models. And again, like I said at the very beginning, I will not recommend which one is the best one for you, for your data, for your task, because that isn't the best one. The choice that you will have to make will depend on your data, your task, and the audience. Sometimes the simple dictionary-based type of approach is more than enough for you in terms of text analysis and get some prediction, some outcomes and use these data prediction or outcomes in the empirical analysis. There's no need to go for, fancy transformer or LLM type of thing. But sometimes when the domain or the data that you have is so unique, you might have to put a little bit of effort into, like writing your own script algorithm to analyze the data using some fancy models. So yeah.
Sorry, cô Thơ có một câu hỏi mà khán giả đặt ra cho cô Thơ ạ. Từ bạn Hương Nguyễn, chúng ta trả lời luôn không chút gì đến cuối chúng ta lại quên ạ. Bạn Hương Nguyễn có đặt câu hỏi cho cô Thơ ạ. Please explain the way the corpus is defined as small corpus, and could you give us literature about this issue?
So you mean what is considered as small corpus, right? I assume.
Yes, that's a yes.
Right. So obviously, any numbers that I will give you is arbitrage, right? But it is known, and I cannot think of a particular paper because it's just a known issue in especially computer science type of literature, that if you train these quarterback or growth kind of models on a very small corpus, you will get very noisy output. But I can recommend you reading a paper by Eliot Ash. I can send the link in the chat later. But basically, he and his co-author, they use quarterback, train a quarterback model on their own just court document kind of data, and the problem for them is for each of the judge that they have in the data, they have very limited training. I think someone turned on the mic. Yeah, thank you. So as I was saying, I can recommend a paper which is not in computer science, but in actually in economics. And the authors of that paper, they use quarterback. They acknowledge that the problem is they have very small corpus to train the quarterback model on. So they did some of the things that I mentioned earlier, that they have to bootstrap the samples and so on to make sure that the resulting vectors are not too noisy, and then use the vectors in that later analysis. Any other questions before I move on? No? Right. So for the interest of time, I will quickly move on talking about two applications which are my papers that I have been using NLP kind of analysis for. So the first paper is the paper that Ko Chang mentioned earlier, the Voice of Monetary Policy paper. And the key thing or the key innovation that we want to do in this paper is we want to look at whether the tone of voice of the Fed chair could convey any information beyond the words that was used, and whether this kind of soft information conveyed from the tone of voice of Fed chair could have any ability to move the financial markets. So the key innovation in my paper is that to develop an algorithm to extract the sentiment from the tone of voice, not from the text. However, we understand that we have to do a very good job at extracting the sentiment from the text as well, because without the, let's say, good measure of the text sentiment, one might argue that whatever results that we have for tone of voice is simply confounded by the sentiment from the text. So even though text sentiment is not the key innovation in my paper, we still have to do a good job at extracting the sentiment from the text, because it is a load-bearing control for my paper. Without it, my paper will be destroyed, basically, in terms of how can we trust the results. So in this project, we didn't use, or at least for the main analysis for the key part of the paper, we didn't use any off-the-shelf options like the dictionary or general bird sentiment classifiers or LLM. For the first one, we didn't go with the dictionary because the dictionary, well-known dictionary like Lucrand and McDonald dictionary, it was built for 10K filings. It was not built to extract the dovish versus hawkish sentiment from the central bank communication. We also didn't use general bird sentiment classifiers because of the same problem, because the existing bird sentiment classifiers, at least at that point, was trained on general text. They were not trained to understand what is the sentiment of the phrases or sentence like inflation has risen in the monetary policy context. And at that point, LLM or AI like ChatGPT or Cloud was not available for us to use, so it was not an option for us at that point. So in that paper, what we decided to do at the end, and actually it was recommended by one of the reviewers in the first round of revision, was to do the fine-tuning. So then what we did was we built a training set. We take all of the FOMC statements between 1997 and 2010, which was a period before our sample analysis. And then we asked multiple RAs to independently score each text that we have in those training data from -10, which is very hawkish, to +10, which is very dovish. And we do the inter-rater agreement type of analysis. And after that, we then classify the text that have the average of less than -0.5 as hawkish, the text that have the average scores of +0.5 as at least +0.5 as dovish, and everything else in between are considered neutral text. And then we use this training sample to train a classifier where we fed each text that we have in our sample for analysis through the pre-trained bird base to obtain the word embeddings. And then we pass the embeddings through the custom deep learning model classifier using the training data that we built in stage 1. To train our classifier and then apply the classifier on our data. And we did a number of things to make sure that the measures that we get from our algorithm is good enough. So we do the held out test accuracy, where we got the overall accuracy of like 81%, which is not bad. And of course, it's not 90% or 95%, but I would be skeptical if one get the accuracy of like 95% type of range, because that might be the side of overfitting. We also did a number of probabilities, again, to make sure that the measure that we get from our algorithm is good enough, where we build a dictionary that accounts for negation and then cross-check our results if we use the dictionary-based measures instead of the LLM-based measures. We also apply the same pilot that we have, but using a different embedding models. We also add in the sentiment. Besides the sentiment that we have from our own algorithm, we also add in the financial sentiment, which is positive versus negative using Finbot. And like I mentioned, we already did the inter-rater agreement analysis on our training data. We did all of these things, and no matter what we do, we get a very robust results in terms of the effect of the tone of voice on the financial market. And then we aggregate our prediction of dovish versus hawkish text to the press conference level measure, and when we use it in our empirical analysis. And with our empirical analysis, we find that after controlling for the Fed actions, so the actual decisions of the Fed, and the sentiment of the policy text, which is what we get out from our NLP approach, we find that the positive tone of voice from the Fed chairs would actually lead to a significant increase in the share prices following the press conference. And the effect is actually comparable in terms of magnitude to that of the text sentiment surprise itself. And not only that the tone of voice of the Fed chairs can move the share price, it also moves a number of other financial variables like the inflation expectation and so on. And based on what we have in terms of results, we come with the conclusion that the effect is that we have for the tone of voice is independent of what is said. It is about how the information was conveyed to the market participants. It was not just about what was conveyed, but also how it was conveyed. So the main thing that I want to deliver here is, even though the voice result is the headline results of our paper, the voice analysis is the key innovation that I have in my paper. But the results that we have for voice is only credible because we did a good job at doing like text measurement and sentiment analysis. Just to make sure that what we have for voice is actually the voice results and not confounded by the noisy text measurement, sentiment measurement, and so on. Right, and I think I have only 3 minutes left, so let me skim through.
Yeah, sorry, cô Thơ. Có một bạn khán giả đang muốn hỏi cô Thơ từ câu hỏi của bạn Nguyễn Huy Hiệu. Đó là your view is the most subjective mode of using TR, IDR, the way we view the dictionary, or better words, and are there any validation methods that can make it more reliable in your view?
Right, so this is a very good question. So the makeup words and the TF-IDF kind of approach, it is not subjective at all, in the sense that you get a huge matrix of frequency from the data. So you don't have to decide which words you're gonna use or which words you're not using. The subjective things come, or the subjective part comes into the dictionary. So the dictionary itself is not actually backup words and TF-IDF. It is under the umbrella of this method. But yes, you're right that with the dictionary, you have to decide which words that you're gonna include in your dictionary and which words you are not. And that's subjective, that's problematic. Now, so in terms of validation, what you could do is, let's say you start with a simple dictionary, and then what you could then do is to expand the dictionary a little bit and see whether the results change materially if you use the simple dictionary or more expanded kind of dictionary. If the results are robust, then you can trust the result. Another thing that you could also do in terms of robustness strength of validation is similar to what we did in our paper. So we didn't just use a simple dictionary. We built a dictionary that accounts for both the normal sentiment type of sense and also negation, so that our dictionary was able to account for the phrases like interest rate was not higher, because interest rate was not higher has a very different meaning compared to interest rate was higher. So you can always twist your dictionary to account for negation, and that would greatly help in terms of accuracy of the measure as well. Yeah.
Chúng ta còn có một câu hỏi nữa đến từ bạn Nguyễn Bá Hoàng. Hôm nay chủ đề của cô Thơ quá là hấp dẫn, thế nên là còn có rất là nhiều câu hỏi dành cho cô Thơ ạ. Bạn Nguyễn Bá Hoàng đã hỏi về là Kisoi Endowment Models Data Growing Package. Bạn Bá Hoàng đã hỏi về cái Data Growing Package mà cô Thơ Sau câu hỏi của bạn Bám Bản, chúng ta có câu hỏi của bạn Vương, Nguyễn và bạn Bùi Thị Hiền ạ. Và xin mời cô Thơ. Chúng ta có rất nhiều câu hỏi ạ. Và cô Thơ trả lời cho cô Thơ.
Right. So for the question about the data crawling packages, my honest answer is I have never used the data crawling packages myself. So the data that I collected, I wrote the script myself. So that's why I have the ability to make sure that the script is working in the way it is intended, that I am able to collect all available information from, whatever website that I scrape the data from. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have answers for that question because I have never used these packages myself. I always wrote the script myself to collect the data. And that's how I can, ensure the quality of the data that I collected. And in my experience, when I do this type of data crawling, data collection, I have to check regularly because the website can change the interface, and when they change the interface, then we have to change the script accordingly, to update it and to make sure that the script can be run on the new interface of the website and so on. So yeah, it is very time consuming, but that's what I do for my data collection. I don't rely on somebody else's package. For a question from Hương, what can we do if the websites have rules that prevent third parties from scraping and crawling? It's a very good question. So I could recommend not to scrape data from the websites because especially nowadays when you submit your papers to top journals, there are always the questions about ethics and about you have to submit the data and code packages for replication. So if the website says that you are not allowed to scrape data from them, I would not scrape data from them. Or if you did in the past, which was fine, and then all of a sudden they introduce these new terms and conditions, then I would stop collecting because you don't want to get into troubles with laws and ethical type of concerns. So yeah, I could just stop. And then there was a question about, can we use AI like ChatGPT to create the backup course? Well, you certainly can, but you don't have to, because with backup courses, it's actually very easy. With a few lines of Python coding, you could do it yourself. So you don't have to use AI for a backup course or TF-IDF at all. The next question is about GPT and cloud constantly update, so we can't always get the same results. Right, so this is what we do. So I do use like GPT and cloud for my own research as well, but mostly for create the training samples and so on. Yes, the concern is real, but it doesn't mean that you cannot use GPT, like AIs like GPT and cloud for text analysis. What you have to do, and what I would recommend you is I would use the API versions of these AI models, because with the API versions, you can control the response much more, in the sense that you can set the temperature to 0, and in that way, these type of models will not get too creative in the prediction in the output. And you also have to document the version of the model that you used for your analysis, whether it is GPT 4.1 or GPT 5.4, whatever model that you used, you have to document it as well. And of course, the cross-check with human labeling is an important part to make sure that you can trust the outputs, you can trust the result that you get from AI. So that's what I would do, and this is what journals generally accept in terms of replication kind of idea of these when you use AIs. Right, and then there were questions about, since AI models evolve rapidly, how can we maintain the novelty and contribution of our model? If I use a deep learning model, how can I make sure my research contribution is not only about the newer techniques and so on? So it is a very good and important question. And okay, so since I don't have time, I will just go straight to the few last slides. So this is my last slide here is exactly what Quỳnh Anh asked, that AI and LLM have developed so much. You can do a lot more, even with a very little coding and understanding of machine learning and stuff. So how can you still get, good publication, good research papers out from it? So the way I have been using NLP and machine learning in general for my research is I think about them as the toolkits. And the key thing is still about the research design, the research question that you have. So for economics and finance research, the key part is still about the research questions that you have in mind. Of course, except from if you go for like applied econometrics or or technical kind of papers, then yes, for those type of papers, the techniques, the methods is the key novelty, is a key contribution. But if you think about like general interest kind of research, then the innovation, the contribution of the paper has to come from the research design, has to come from the topic, the research questions. And NLP or machine learnings are only the tools that you use to make that type of questions credible. And that's how I view when I use NLP and machine learning for my research. So, and then there was a question about the level of sentiment when scoring. Is the distinction between positive and negative level can be quantified using NLP methods like +100 means very positive, but -10 means little negative. Yes, so you certainly can do that. Let me back to one of the slides that I have here. So even with the backup words or TF-IDF type of methods, what you could do is you can apply backup words or TF-IDF on your data to get this kind of matrix, and then apply the matrix on a set of training sample, where in that training sample, similar to what I did for my own paper, we defined, we have a kind of continuous, bounded continuous scales of hawkish versus dookish. So it was not just -1 +1, it actually ranges from -10 to +10. And the same thing that you can do for your training data, instead of -10 to 110, you can have -100 to +100. It is, of course, it's subjective. It is also arbitrage, the way you divide it. But as long as you are transparent about what -10 means for your data and what +10 means for your data, then you are fine. So
chúng ta có một câu hỏi, chúng ta có một câu hỏi từ bạn Từ Vân Đức ạ. Bạn có thưa dành chút thời gian để trả lời câu hỏi cho bạn Từ Đức ạ.
Right, so I'm trying to read the question. I have so many papers talking about adversarial attacks. So they try to change a sentence documents a little bit. So everyone could say that the sentence does not change in sentiment and tone. But then the sentiment models like GPT-BERT gives us different answers compared to the original sentence. Right. Okay, so I couldn't call it a text per se, in the sense that, well, technically, when you change the sentence or the document, of course, you could expect to get slightly different numbers when you use the off-the-shelf model. But it goes back to my point when I mentioned about off-the-shelf model. Here's that there are problems when we use the off-the-shelf models, when interpretability is difficult, and like applying one off-the-shelf model on a slightly different context and slightly different data. That's, yes, sorry, somebody's talk. Right. So that's the risk of using the off-the-shelf model. So that's why I kept mentioning that in my personal experience, I don't really use the off-the-shelf model as is. I tend to fine-tune the off-the-shelf models on my own training data, on my own domain data, and so on, to make sure that I could, to some extent, get some controls of the output that I will get from the model.
Thank you so much for your answer, but I'm sorry, but I found some paper. They said that, for example, the markers in 2026, they said that even for FinBERT or FinGPT or some fine-tuned model, they still can be vulnerable to this kind of attack. They just train a little bit the way how they use the sentence or how they allocate the sentence in the words in the sentence. So in the eye of a human, so the sentence is completely the same, have the same meaning with the original sentence. But then the model gives us, for example, for the original sentence, it said that it is positive, but for the sentence that we changed it a little bit, so the model said that it is negative. So it is really a text. Yeah.
Well, okay, right. So I understand where you're coming from now. I have two responses to it. The first one is that's why I kept saying that no matter what approach that you use, validation is important, especially human validation. That, let's say, you apply FinBERT, for example, on your data, and then you get 10% or 20% of random classification, and ask RAs or you and your co-authors, you all sit down independently to do some kind of classification yourself, and then cross-check your own classification with the FinBERT-based classification. If you get good agreement between you and the model, then it is okay, right? So that's why validation is really important in this kind of work. And well, the second response that I had in mind was, just 1 second. Right, so the first one is about validation. Okay, I will come back to that later. I had a second point in mind, but now I totally forgot what I wanted to say. But yeah, validation is, like I said, is really, really important, especially when you use the off-the-shelf model. And then
Có một câu hỏi rất là dài này của bạn là cô Thơ có thể select ạ, vì thời gian của cô Thơ cũng có hạn, thế nên là cô Thơ có thể select một số câu hỏi để cô Thơ có thể trả lời ạ.
So I had one question from Giảng about the NLP measurement that we got in the data that we did in our voice paper, where just we trained the classifier on data from 1997 to 2010. Yes, sorry, it's kind of related to Huang's question now. Back to Nick's question earlier about like attacks and misclassification of some models. The second response that I had in mind was, no matter what models you use, there are always measurement errors, right? Because like even in my own model, we only got the held out test accuracy of 80%, meaning that there is a chance that 20% of the data will be misclassified, which is fine if you think about average, because what you estimate is not individual estimate for each of the observations that you have in the data. You get the average of those observations. So as long as the accuracy is good enough, and good enough, I mean like about 70%-ish and above, then you are fine on average. That on average, your measurement is the correct. So yes, the attacks are real, but as long as the average accuracy is good enough, you don't need to worry about what you are estimating, put this way. And this is related to Van's question about we changed our data on pre-2011 period and applied it on the post-2011 period. And of course, during these two periods, there were changes in the text of the central communication, they changed the format and so on. Yes, but like I said, as long as on average it was accurate, then we are fine. And also what we did, but we didn't report it in the paper, was we actually also asked our RAs to do a random check of the classification that we got from our classifier, and the agreement was really high between our RA's rating and the model ratings. So to say that we did a lot of robustness checks and validation checks to make sure that our measures was good enough. Yeah. Any more questions?
Cảm ơn cô Thơ rất là nhiều. Trong khán phòng này cũng đang có một câu hỏi dành cho cô Thơ ạ. Mời cô Thơ. Xin mời ạ.
Thank you, sir, for your very nice and interesting presentations. I just want to visit your voice of monetary policy paper. So I want to ask about the causalities of, the relation, right? Because when the policymaker, because the voice matter, right? So the way you convey the message is important. So the policymaker may want to either dampen the expectations or stimulate the mood of the market a little bit. So how do you factor that into your causal relationship there? I can see any, attempt to deal with the causal relation there, because when it's not kind of something you just, because of the way that you convey the message. So it's either you can tone it up or tone it down, but because you can foresee the expectation of the market. Right? So yeah, so I think it's not the voice of the market. Maybe it's not the voice of the market or the voice of the money policies, but maybe it's expectation of the market already factoring the voice of the monetary policy. So just curious. Thank you very much.
Right, that's a very good question, and this is a question that we actually got when we presented the paper before as well. Now that you points about the question, so here, if it is true that the central bankers, the Fed chairs, think about like future expectation, future or anticipate the responses from the market, so that's why they purposely set things in the way that they did, then it actually worked in our favors, because we don't claim causality in the paper. What we documented is some correlational patterns that are robust to alternative specifications and so on. So it actually worked in our favor that actually they changed the voice purposely because they anticipate that the market would then react to the voice, to the tone and the happy mood and so on. So that's the first point. And then the second point was when we presented this paper, we actually got in touch with a number of people, including economists, who was advisors to the pet shed, and who was actually present at these press conferences. And we was also in touch with the journalist who was actually present at the press conferences as well. And from our conversations with those people, we got the sense that, of course, they are not confirming like 100% confirming anything because they don't have ability to do so. But what they say is that, yes, there was kind of surprised kind of element in the responses of the pet shed during the press conferences. And that's why in the paper, we only focused on the Q&A session, because imagine before this talk today, I practiced my presentation and I anticipated certain kind of reaction from the audience. So I practiced in a certain way, made it, very cheerful and whatever. But when I got these unexpected questions from you, I didn't expect this. I might react differently because of the question that you asked on the spot. And it seems to us that this is actually what happened during the press conferences, at least for the Fed. And that's why we focused on the Q&A session, because that way we could get more surprises, put this way, compared to, like the opening statements or the concluding remarks kind of session of the press conference. Yeah.